Well, good afternoon again, everyone, and thank you for being here to help us remember and celebrate the life of Carol Johnson, a family member and a dear friend to us all. Carol did not desire to have a formal funeral service, so to honor her wishes, but to still honor her with the honor she so much deserves, the family has put together this short memorial service to share parts of her life with all of us. It was certainly a long and productive life, a life well lived. My wife and I had the privilege of knowing Carol for many years, having first come into contact with her in the opening years of 2000s when we lived in Phoenix. Many of you have known her probably much longer than that, but one thing I think we all would agree is that Carol exuded just an incredible friendliness, a warmth, a positivity, and of course, love. She most always had a smile on her face every time I saw her, even when she was facing some pretty severe health trials. She always had that smile on her face. Another of her many qualities was her complete faithfulness to God and to the church. Her desire was to always be at Sabbath services if possible. Some Sabbaths, I'm certain, were difficult for her and for her family that looked after her, but it was so very important for her to be here whenever it was possible. Her love for God and the church and her actions that demonstrate that commitment was and is a powerful example for all of us. Carol's family has put together a short video highlighting several aspects of her long, varied, and interesting life. Even if you've known Carol for a long time, perhaps you might learn a thing or two about her that you may never have known. Part of this video includes a music piece that was one of her favorites, and when she listened to it, her family says always made her happy. Allie told me that one of the last things she listened to was the song that's in this video. I'd like to highlight a verse that Allie mentioned to me. That verse goes like this. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come, still my soul sings your praise unending, 1,000 years and then forevermore. And now the video.
Descending from a family of adventurers and pioneers, Carol Joyce Fancher was the only child of Ted and Jessie Fancher. Carol was born in Kansas City, Missouri on August 19, 1923, 6 years before the Great Depression. Her father was the manager of a prized Jersey dairy herd on the Longview Farm, designed and built by Robert A. Long to be the most beautiful farm in the world. It was in this environment that young Carol would grow. When Mr. Long died, J.C. Hall of Hallmark Cards bought most of the dairy herd and hired Carol's father. The emphasis on excellence was impressed on Carol from a very young age, and those values remained throughout her entire life.
In 1935, Carol joined her mother and aunt on a cross-country road trip, traveling on a partly paved Route 66. At summer's end, they headed back to their new home at Hallmark Farm. Carol loved riding horses across the farm and woodland. She learned to cook alongside her mother, who was famous for her fried chicken dinners. Like her mother, Carol enjoyed playing piano, crocheting, sewing, and embroidery, creating most of her wardrobe herself. She also accompanied her father in his work, learning to judge cattle, which was most unusual for a female in those days. Carol's family would often travel on the train with the Hall family and the show cows, including the Borden Dairy Company's original mascot, Elsie. On one trip, the family was in the dining car when a man at the next table cut into his grapefruit. It sprayed into young Carol's eye and she started crying. That man was J.C. Penney. They became good friends for the rest of the trip. She especially enjoyed the 1939 World's Fair in New York City, with its theme, The World of Tomorrow.
After graduating from high school, she attended Kansas State University in Manhattan, where she studied French and majored in home economics. In 1941, while singing in the church choir, Carol spotted three brothers on the front row that she hadn't seen before. She boldly asked one of the brothers, Robert Ruxton, to accompany her to a party the next week. A few days later, Carol returned from an errand to see an Indian motorcycle parked in front of the house. Inside, her mother was serving the young gentleman homemade chocolate cake and peppermint ice cream, thus sealing his fate. Bob's family ancestry also included explorers and a well-chronicled mountain man. With a degree in mechanical engineering, he wanted to start his career, but World War II was looming, so Bob joined the Army Air Force and left for Europe. Carol supported the war effort as an aeronautic radio telephone operator and began working for Braniff Airlines in Dallas, Texas. Love Field had become a training ground for pilots and mechanics during wartime. Carol kept all the letters Bob wrote her during this time, not knowing if he would survive the war.
After a stressful 2 years, Carol decided to move back home to Kansas City, where she continued working in the aviation field. Bob was not at liberty to discuss his wartime assignments, but she later learned that he was with a group of soldiers who landed on the beaches of Normandy just after D-Day. When Bob returned in December 1945, he proposed, and they were married the next year. Bob and Carol built a house near their extended families. He went back to school while also working for several engineering firms. Carol worked for the American Legion, helping returning veterans until the boss discovered her cooking skills and gave her a new position, catering lunches and events. In their free time, the couple traveled to the shores of Texas and through Canada, often following in the footsteps of their pioneer ancestors. After their son Gary was born in 1954, Carol became a full-time mother and homemaker.
In 1955, a religious television program called The World Tomorrow caught their attention. Bob tuned in thinking it was a science fiction program. Carol was reminded of the World's Fair with a similar name that made such an impression on her. After listening for a while, they met with two ministers from the sponsoring church and were baptized in November of 1957. After corresponding with several administrators at the church headquarters in Pasadena, California, Bob applied to the church's Ambassador College. He felt that his education and experience might be of service. He was accepted in 1959, and 3 weeks later, they had sold their home, car, and most of their belongings and drove their Jeep with a trailer to their new home on the corner of Del Mar and Orange Grove Avenue.
Bob was a full-time student, and Carol took classes as well. Bob was asked to supervise construction on the campus and work to tie the different parts of the campus together via careful design, hardscape, plantings, and a meandering stream, as well as updating the pool and fountains in the Italian garden. Soon daughter Alice was on her way, and they moved to larger quarters in nearby La Cañada, where she was born. In his senior year of college, Bob was sent to Big Sandy, Texas, to lay groundwork for a new college campus. He continued his studies from a distance, the first student on the new Texas campus, completing his 4th degree and graduating from Ambassador College in 1963. Carol spent her time in Pasadena taking care of the children and helping Isabel Hay and Loma Armstrong test recipes for several in-house church publications until she and the children could join Bob in their new home on Faculty Row in Big Sandy. Carol enjoyed decorating the new home, as well as mentoring co-eds in the home arts. Bob, as Director of Buildings and Grounds, began creating Lake Loma and oversaw the construction of roads, dormitories, faculty homes, classrooms, and the campus airstrip, where he and the family enjoyed taking to the air on occasion.
And then suddenly, tragedy struck. On May 14, 1965, Bob and another man were driving during a torrential downpour on a highway that was improperly banked. They began to slide, smashing into an oncoming telephone truck. Bob did not survive the crash. Carol had unexpectedly lost her father, her mother-in-law, and now her husband of nearly 2 decades in a few short years. She carried on as best she could, spending time visiting and helping those in need while taking care of her children and the home. Carol continued to hone her pie baking skills and on a whim entered the Gilmer Jamboree Pie Contest. To everyone's surprise, she won the grand prize. When they discovered that a non-native Texan had won the contest, it nearly caused a scandal. She soon caught the attention of a widower from Missouri. A relationship developed, and Walter Johnson and his 2 young sons, Doug and Dave, officially merged their family with Carol's on September 27, 1966, and they made their new home together near Kansas City.
Walter worked in banking and was also an ordained minister. The church asked him to move to Vancouver, British Columbia, to work with finances in the Canadian office. They accepted the challenge. The family emigrated to Canada on October 17, 1968. Carol embraced the local bounty, entering some of her creations at the Pacific National Exhibition and bringing home more ribbons. As always, they continued hosting guests and events at their home. Carol enjoyed the role of hostess over the 14 years they were in Vancouver. The family spent spring breaks and summers visiting Carol's mother at her home on Puget Sound near Seattle. All 4 children graduated from high school in North Vancouver and went off to college. Graduations and weddings and grandchildren followed. Now, with an empty nest, they were able to travel more often.
In 1981, they were again asked to move, 2,300 miles away to the middle of Texas. Embracing their new life in Waco and Austin, the couple was well loved by the church members. They had planned for Waco to be their home for retirement, but in 1989 they were transferred once again, this time to Redding, California. Walter and Carol found a home on the Sacramento River Trail. As was their way, they designed and used the home to serve the need of their congregations, even when Walter was asked to retire. They took special time to visit with Carol's mother, who died in 1990 at the age of 102. Within a year, Walter was diagnosed with cancer and died a few months later on April 2, 1992, at the age of 70.
After 25 years of marriage to Walter, Carol was alone again. For 8 years, she continued to host church-related meetings and gatherings at her home, visiting other widows and bringing meals to people in need. She started entering baking contests again, winning more ribbons for her pies, cakes, and sewing projects. She traveled a bit, taking a trip down the coast of California with granddaughter Pam Johnson, and joining family on a cruise through the Inside Passage to Alaska. As time passed and circumstances changed, it seemed best for Carol to relocate to Shadow Hills, California, to be with her daughter and family. Carol's newly remodeled space included everything on her wish list: a garden of her own, a yard for her dog, and a kitchen where she could continue to bake. Carol's sewing skills from that time have a lasting church legacy. She made 2 sets of blue curtains to serve as a backdrop for Pasadena church services. These live on today in physical form, but also as a virtual backdrop used by people around the globe on Zoom.
Always up for adventure, Carol made new friends and started traveling again. She flew to Australia and toured the land down under, She also went to the UK, where she talked her way into a privately owned castle that had belonged to her first husband's family centuries before. She made many road trips with friends across the country and to Canada. She drove several ladies in her big white Buick, white-knuckling to Solvang on a memorable day trip. When deteriorating vision meant she could no longer drive her car, Carol was still able to travel in other ways. Her last airplane flight was to Texas in 2018 for the wedding of her stepson Dave Johnson and his bride Michelle. The flight landed at Love Field, where she had worked 75 years earlier. She was welcomed and was shown a special exhibit that celebrated the history of the field and of Braniff Airlines, which brought back many memories for her. When she wasn't traveling, Carol enjoyed the many events that took place at the extended family home, especially the events with large groups. She was always eager to join the party and help out when she could.
As time went on, Carol's mobility and eyesight continued to fail. She'd made it clear to the family that she never wanted to go to the puppy farm, her term for assisted living facilities. The family created a new apartment for her to safely age in place. Throughout the pandemic, Carol looked forward to church services on Zoom and fellowshipping sessions where she loved listening to everyone's updates and always had stories of her own to share. As soon as in-person church services began again, she made every effort to attend. It was always the highlight of her week. As 2021 ended, a series of small strokes left her needing special help. Her last days were spent under hospice care in her own home, with friends and family visiting in person, via FaceTime or phone call. So many loving and supportive cards, letters, flowers, and special messages arrived, showing her impact on the lives of others throughout her 98 and a half years. On Saturday, March 12th, she took her final breath at home, surrounded by family.
Carol is survived by her family, Gary Ruxton and wife Jacqueline, Doug Johnson and wife Janelle, Dave Johnson and wife Michelle, daughter Alice Abler and husband Dwayne. And between the siblings, 10 grandchildren and 16 great-grandchildren. Over her lifetime, Carol would look for ways to help others. She found joy in giving and sharing, and was always ready to encourage others in her own way. She was passionate about family values and home arts, and maintained unwaveringly high standards. Her determination, strength, and faith serve as examples to others who knew her and continue to look to a future world of tomorrow, the time she looked toward with great anticipation, a time of healing and a time of great joy. The last piece of music that Carol listened to was one that had been recorded during the pandemic, performed by some of her family for a church convention.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I worship your holy name. The sun comes up, it's a new day dawning. It's time to sing your song again. Whatever may pass and whatever lies before me, let me be singing when the evening comes. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul, worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul, I worship your holy name. You're rich in love and You're slow to anger, your name is great, and your heart is kind. For all your goodness, I will keep on singing. 10,000 reasons for my heart to find. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. Worship Your holy name. And on that day when my strength is failing, the end draws near and my time has come, still my soul will sing Your praise unending. 1,000 years and then forevermore. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I worship Your holy name. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, oh my soul. Worship His holy name. Sing like never before, oh my soul. I worship Your holy name. I worship Your holy name. I will worship Your holy name.
What a wonderful tribute to a wonderful lady. Did you learn a few things about Carol? I certainly did. I think it's incredible she knew J.C. Penney's, and also I didn't know the background to this blue curtain, but every time I see the blue curtain, I'll think of Carol. As was mentioned earlier, Carol did not wish to have a formal funeral service, but the family thought it would be appropriate to briefly share the hope that Carol firmly believed about the future, as well as her future, as well as the eventual future of all mankind, which is, of course, based upon what God reveals to us in the Bible. Carol believed, as the psalmist wrote, that humans are God's special creation. As Psalm 8 says, "When I look at the heavens, which your fingers made, and see the moon and the stars you set in place, of what importance is the human race that you should notice them? Of what importance is mankind that you should pay attention to them and make them a little less than the heavenly beings? You grant mankind honor and majesty. You appoint them to rule over your creation. You have placed everything under their authority." As amazing as it is that humans hold this special place in God's eyes, human life always ends. But as the book of Job shows, death is not a permanent end. There is a future time of renewed life. The book of Job says this: "Oh, that you would hide me in the grave," or the Hebrew word Sheol, "and conceal me till your anger has passed. Oh, that you would set a time and then remember me. If a man dies, will he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait until my renewal comes. You will call, and I will answer you. You will long for the work of your hands." And later in the book of Job it says, "As for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that at the last he will stand upon the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet apart from my flesh I will see God, whom I will see for myself, and whom my own eyes will behold." The Bible, of course, compares death to sleep and speaks of a future time when all will be awakened to a life by a resurrection from the dead. Paul writes of this in 1 Corinthians 15. He writes this, "But now Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruit of those who have fallen asleep. For since death came through a man, the resurrection of the dead also came through a man. For just as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive." Paul, in writing to the congregation in Thessalonica, in part to educate and encourage them regarding the difficult subject of death, wrote this. "Now, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who are asleep or dead, so that you would not grieve like the rest who have no hope. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a shout of a command and with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will suddenly be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord." Carol knew as she approached the end of her life that this future resurrection to life was a certainty. She read countless times Paul's description of the future of this hope. Again, Paul writes, "Now this is what I'm saying, brothers and sisters, flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. Listen, I will tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a moment, in a blinking of an eye at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. For the perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. Now when this perishable puts on the imperishable, and this mortal puts on immortality, then the saying that is written will happen, death has been swallowed up in victory. Where, O death, is your victory? Or where, O death, is your sting?" So then, dear brothers and sisters, be firm. Do not be moved. Always be outstanding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Carol believed, as these verses show, that when Christ returns, she will be resurrected to life that can no longer be affected by death. When all is complete and God is dwelling here on earth with mankind, this earth will be a very different place, as the Apostle John shows us in the book of Revelation. He wrote, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and earth had ceased to exist, and the sea existed no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, made ready like a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, the residence of God is among human beings. He will live among them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will not exist anymore, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the former things have ceased to exist.' And the one seated on the throne said, 'Look, I am making all things new.' Then he said to me, 'Write it down, because these words are reliable and true.'" I'll ask Ali to come forward now and to direct the next part of the service.
Just in case. A little closer. Thank you, Mr. Kiefer. She certainly looked forward to the future you described, and that's where her hope lies, and we hope to see her fully healed in the future at that same time. And thank you all, friends and family, for all your support, your cards, your letters, not just for her, but also for our family in the last few months. It's really been wonderful to see that outpouring of care and concern. And thank you all for coming today, too, because this is where she wanted to be, this with not only her children and her grandchildren and now her great-grandchildren, but her physical family, but also her spiritual family here, of course, and around the world. And She loved all of you very much and prayed for many of you daily. So thank you for being here. Each of you were very special to her. My brother Gary was planning on coming this weekend, and it's funny, when he told me he was going to come, I had this thought, I got to tell my mom, she'll be so excited. And, you know, it's like she's still there in many ways, but they spoke on the phone fairly regularly toward the end, and she would have been very happy. He, unfortunately, spent much of his day yesterday in an airport and today as well trying to get down here, and I think if all goes well he's in the air right now. But he suffered a stroke a couple of years ago and was partly paralyzed, and he must have inherited a good portion of my mother's strength and determination and intestinal fortitude, because he's walking today. And I wish I could have him walk up to the podium right now and say a few words, but he has sent me some things that he wants me to read on his behalf. So, let me find his stories here. And they're light and fluffy, don't worry, nothing, nothing too heavy. You saw, of course, that the family moved out to Pasadena in the late 1950s. So his story starts there. He says, when we moved out to Pasadena, we brought the Jeep. And that always attracted attention. They weren't as common then as they are now. So when Mom went to get her California driver's license, she took the driving test in the Jeep. She had quite an audience when she was parallel parking. Several he-men were sure she couldn't do it. Women just didn't do that sort of thing back then. But the challenge was on. And she certainly schooled them on that day. And once I was in the backyard in my treehouse when I heard a big piercing whistle and my name hollered by Mom. I cringe thinking of that. I was totally startled because I had never heard her whistle using her fingers to her lips. I thought only Dad did that. I knew I was in big trouble. I never heard her do that again. While we were living on the Ambassador College campus in Texas, Mom liked to can hot peppers. And let me just interject, I remember those. I mentioned this to Dwayne this morning, and he asked me what variety they were, and I couldn't quite remember. He was very disappointed. I said I was 3, maybe 4. But I do remember looking at this beautiful pepper plant. They were little waxy peppers about yay big, well, probably yay big for what I remembered then versus what I would remember now, but green and red and just beautiful. And my mom told me, leave those peppers alone, don't mess with those peppers. So of course I had to mess with the peppers. And when I came, crying to her, she said, well, lesson learned here, I hope, listen to what I tell you. And I've never rubbed my eyes with peppers on my fingers since then, but back to my brother's story here. Once she canned these peppers, and I remember this clearly too. Once she would put them in a jar and they would slightly ferment, they would pickle a bit, and they were potent. Says once opened, they went in the fridge with a metal ring and lid. It wouldn't be long before the lids would have to be replaced because they would rust out, which at age 10, I figured was because they were so blistering spicy hot. I don't remember eating them, but I do remember making bug spray out of it. It worked very well on the little sugar ants that came into the house. I never did try it on scorpions, which were plentiful at that time in Big Sandy. And I remember scorpions too. We were living in what was Texas wilderness before our house was built there. And yes, we had to shake our shoes out every time we put them on, and yes, we did find scorpions sometimes. I also remember hearing my mother, with her Alice Lynn, just like Gary heard his. But one night, I remember hearing this, and I came in to see what was going on, because when my name was invoked in such a fashion, I knew it was serious. And she told me to run into the garage and get a flat-bladed shovel from a little set I had, a little junior gardener set. And so I brought her the shovel, and she took it and quickly beheaded a rattlesnake that was in the house. And where was Big Brother Gary for all this? I'll have to ask him when he gets here later today. But the point of all these stories, his and the few I interjected too, was she was a lot tougher than she looked. If something needed to be done, she did it. And now I would like to introduce by video my stepbrother, Dave Johnson, who is in Texas right now. But he'll have a few little stories for you as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Johnson. Carol was my stepmother, and I have a couple of stories to contribute today. One of them involved the invention of nachos, which Carol was the inventor of nachos. She just didn't get credit for it. Back in the late 60s, maybe 67 or 68, she invented this dish that started out with a layer of Fritos on the bottom of the dish, followed by hamburger and onion, and then topped off with lettuce and tomatoes. And when this dish was served for dinner, I pretty much ate until I was incapacitated. Picture an African nature film, maybe, where the lions feed until they can't eat anymore, and they lay on their backs with their bellies in the air. You get the picture. It wasn't pretty. We called this invention the stuff with the Fritos on the bottom. Yeah, okay, nachos is a better name for it. But in any case, she invented it, and I always thought she should have credit for it. The other story involved table manners. Carol always tried to teach us good table manners, and she had more success with some things than with others. When I was in high school in Vancouver, we had a Bing cherry tree in the backyard, and just gallons of cherries off of this tree every year. They were just great. When Carol explained to us that the proper way to dispose of a cherry pit at the dinner table is to take your spoon and then discreetly, push the cherry pit into the spoon and then tap it on the edge of your plate. So my brother and I had our own method that we devised for doing this. It wasn't quite the same. We would hold the spoon at about a 45-degree angle, maybe halfway between our mouths and the plate. And then in one smooth move, we would spit the cherry pit, bounce it off the spoon, and land it in the plate. It's not quite what Emily Post had in mind, but I think the important thing is that to this day, I still remember how you're supposed to dispose of a cherry pit at the dinner table.
Well, thank you, Dave. Dave's big brother, Doug Johnson, could not be with us today either, so he sent a story for me to share with you today as well. I'll read that for you now. Dad and Carol were married September 27th, 1966, in Big Sandy, Texas. Following the Feast of Tabernacles that year, 6 people crowded into her 1965 Ford Mustang for the 500 miles trip to Kansas City, Overland Park to be more precise. Considering 3 of the passengers were boys aged 14, 12, and 12, it was a tight fit. But we all survived. In order to keep peace in the crowded back seat, a significant portion of the conversation surely revolved around eating, a well-known pastime of such creatures as these 3 boys. Fast forward some months. It was a Sunday, and Sundays had certain expectations, such as all-you-can-eat brunches. It was on one such Sunday that Carol's marathon pancake session began. The meal began innocently enough. Carol fired up the griddle, and pancakes began to roll off. How she managed to grab a bite herself is a mystery shrouded now in the mists of time. The 2 adults had modest capacities, ditto the young girl, perhaps age 6 by now. 7. Maybe 6 or 8 pancakes total, tops. Not so the 3 monsters of the midday meal. The numbers began to mount. 4 apiece, then 8, then 12. Now 36 pancakes had disappeared into the 3 bottomless voids called stomachs. The challenge was on. Who would faint first? The muscular maws of the monsters or the tireless cook? Grimly, she turned to her task. The tension mounted. Finally, one groaning contestant had to stop. 15 pancakes bloating his digestive machinery. The remaining 2 vied for the lead, 16 each, 17, 18, 19. When would it end? Both finally reached the dizzying number of 20 pancakes apiece. Contestant number 2 moaned and rolled onto the floor. But could it end in a tie? Not possible. The last man standing carefully shoveled pancake number 21 into his tired but still numbly working jaws. Who won? Well, the chef was still standing, perspiring over her grill, with a handful of leftover pancakes headed into the refrigerator. Need you ask? Doug and his wife Janelle tried to make annual visits out here in the last few years to visit with Carol and us, and we appreciated that very much. They were very special times. Janelle has a story that she also wanted me to share with you. Our first annual this is from Janelle. Our first annual Southern California trip to visit Carol in her later years sadly coincided with Dwayne's brother Rick's death. As Dwayne was flying home after being with his family in Wisconsin, Doug joined Allie on the drive to LAX to pick him up, leaving me with Carol at her apartment. She was so happy to have us with her for a visit that she broke out some of her favorite brandy. She poured and then turned on the news. For decades, I had known her to be interested in current events. We watched, we sipped, we parsed, we solved. We settled the world's problems with only the slightest aid from brandy. Détente accomplished. Carol channel surfed until she landed on the Hallmark Movie Channel. A trademark rom-com teased us out of the surrounding world news dampness. Snagged in the web of imperfect entanglements, we blurted, "Dear Abby, Counsel," relaxing only when the plot began to even out to our liking. It was then that I realized the merit of escaping into a romantic comedy with this woman who had lived a life, having lost 2 husbands, having been audited not once but twice by the IRS, a woman who had seen the world through the changing prism of 9 decades. As Sanditon actor Ben Lloyd Hughes recently revealed in an interview, I do genuinely love romantic comedies. I think there is such an escapism to them, and it's such a go-to place for me when I am feeling low or a certain way. I think what I love about a good romantic comedy is that you are able to see the flaws in the characters, but you still warm to them. Flaws and warmth indeed. Bring on those rom-coms. With the same layering that makes a good brandy, we establish new levels of comfort and warmth that, most memorably, launched our visits for many more delightful years to come. Janelle mentioned that my mom always wanted to keep on top of world events, and it was fairly normal for her to turn on her television in the morning and see what was happening in the world. And as we know, it's been pretty dark lately. A lot of horrible things happening in the world. And in her last few weeks, sometimes she would fall asleep in her recliner and I'd tiptoe in and change the channel to the Hallmark channel. And as Janelle said, there's some value into escaping into that warm, comfortable world from time to time, and that was certainly her time to do that. She didn't need to hear about the horrible things happening in the world today when her mind at this time was being focused on the world tomorrow and the future we heard about earlier. And as you heard in the video, in her early years, she spent a lot of time with the Hall family, and some gifts that they had given her, she treasured until the very end, and we still have them today. And I couldn't help but think that this Hallmark channel with its warm, fuzzy movies was like one final gift from the Hall family to her. But as we were going through the materials for this video that you saw earlier, I realized you only know your mother, your parents, for maybe half their lives, more if you're lucky. And we learned so much about her that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And I would like to give a special thank you to Dwayne Abler for taking on that monumental project. You thought I meant the video? Well, yes, that was very much a labor of love, but beyond that, I meant taking on his mother-in-law for 24 years. Who does that voluntarily? But seriously, nearly a quarter of a century of mother-in-law jokes aside, he voluntarily welcomed her into our home and into our lives. We were entrusted with her care, and we are grateful to have had this opportunity. We all learned and we all grew from the experience. She told us that when she was gone, she didn't want people crying, being sad. She wanted laughter instead of tears. So tomorrow, we'll have a celebration of her life with a theme of the country fairs she loved so much, and we'll be sharing a meal of some of her favorite foods like Kansas City barbecue and cakes and pies and baked goods. All these other things near and dear to her heart. And yes, you heard about her invention of nachos, which might have sounded a lot like a Frito pie for those of you who are familiar with that. And Frito pie may make an appearance tomorrow as well. So you're all invited from 2 to 4 p.m. The address is on the back of the brochures you have. Come through the side gate. Those of you who've been there before know how that works. It will be hot, so as you heard earlier, we've decided to open up the pool. So looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Y'all come on down, as she would have said when she lived in Texas. So now I'll hand it back to Mr. Kiefer. And I'll leave the tissues.
We're going to close with a prayer, so if you please bow your heads. Our Father and our God in heaven, we come before you very grateful for the blessing that all of us have had of knowing Carol Johnson. We honor that life today. We thank you so much for all of her experiences, for the influence that she's had on all of us, and the positive things that she's left in our lives, all the things that she has accomplished during that life. We're very grateful. We're privileged to have known her. Father, we do ask that we know with death that there's pain involved with those that remain alive, and we ask for your comfort for the family, for all of the family, and all of us who do grieve the loss of Carol. We know that she's safe, that she's asleep now and waiting for the resurrection, waiting for you to call. And we're certain of that, and we're grateful for the knowledge of that. We know that she was aware of that. We know that she had full confidence in that, and we put our hope and trust in that as well. Father, we ask that you would help the family to keep her memory alive, to share that with the generations that follow, that they would in some way know her, and that they can think about the experiences and the example that she set. We thank you for the family, particularly the Abler family that we're so acquainted with, that has set a tremendous example of caring for her this last 24 years. And we thank you for the examples that you provide for us that we can follow. So we just thank you for the privilege of knowing Carol. We thank you for her life. We ask that you would help all of us as we think about her, and especially tomorrow as we gather. We thank you for the memory of her, and we thank you most of all for your plan and for the idea, the thought, the certainty that she will once again hear your voice, and we'll be able to embrace her and to have her in our lives once again. So we thank you for all this. We give you thanks for all things, Father, and we do so in the name and by the authority of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you for coming.
It is video. Of course it is. Of course it is. Yes, it is. Beautiful.
Right behind that blind.
Because Mr. Murphy was asking where Shane is, and I thought I saw him come in, and it's like, he disappeared.
I'll mention it.
Coach. I need that bubble gun.
Sometimes she'll tell me about, people she likes to hang out with on set and how shooting goes, that sort of thing. She's really cool. Surprisingly down to earth. That's good, which is nice. She's not like a brat or anything.
I mean, I found it.
Perfect.
Follow me, it follows me or something. But then, I mean, whose dog is it?
Okay, but yeah,
What's up?
Anything in it.
All right.
Such grace. Let's just scary out a little over.
And for you?